Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Eastern Shore Talk, your podcast for all things self care and movies. We are now on episode 31, and we are going to have a special guest, Ann Svogun. But as usual, I'm Jay Watson,
I'm Kathy Castle.
and we're going to, and it's for those of you who have seen the little clips on YouTube. Ann has been on before. We had some technical difficulties, so I was not able to actually record a full, entire, legitimate episode with Ann. So for that reason and many other reasons, we want to have Ann back on. One of the big reasons was that Kathy wasn't able to go on with
Yeah.
us last time, so Kathy gets to talk with her.
I'm going to
And
hope that my technical difficulties resolve tonight so that I don't become the blip this time, right?
yeah, and we'll just take you. We'll boot you out and just be
Yeah.
yeah.
If I disappear, don't be offended. I'll try to come back in. Try to sneak back in.
So, real quick, Ann is an online friend of mine that I met a while back. She was a teacher at the time doing some personal training and has transitioned into the online fitness and wellness arena. And welcome back, Ann. And for those of you who maybe missed it last time, give kind of a little recap of what you do now, and then we'll kind of go back and kind of recap your story and get into your self-care testimonial.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. And I always
Absolutely.
enjoy immensely talking with you. So, Kathy, it's a treat to be joined by both of you this evening. For those of you who are brand
Yes.
new to me and the online space, I run Active with Ann Coaching, which is an online nutrition and wellness coaching service, completely remote. And really, the design of it is to allow people to feel empowered and to get out of their own ways, because sometimes we overcomplicate what it takes to live happy, healthy lives. And my whole mission is to make it more attainable and achievable, whether you're a man, you're a woman, whether you're 80 years old. I have the most adorable 80-year-old golfer over in Pinehorse. And then I also work with junior golfers. So I have quite the variety of people. And it's really been a dream come true, because I started as an educator in a classroom and I wanted to have a larger impact, to be able to reach more people. And so that's kind of where, around the time of COVID, I saw an opportunity to service people who needed help with mental health and finding a way to move their body to get rid of some additional anxiety or stress that they had, and to connect with other people in a way that maybe they've never had to before. And so really around, what was that, 2019-ish, I'll say, I started coaching remotely
Mm-hmm.
and grew a following on a little raving fans, if you will, inside our Active with Ann community, to the point where I looked at my husband and I was like, Chris, for my sanity and the sanctity of our marriage, can I please go all in on this business? I have just as many clients as I do students in my grade, and I can't do it anymore. And
Yeah.
he was super supportive,
Yeah.
and I'm blessed for that. And ever since then, I haven't looked back. I've been able to go all in on continuing to serve. And I truly believe, when I look at my mission in life, I am blessed that to know in my 30s that this is what God wanted me to do. He wanted me to be able to go out and inspire and empower individuals to step into their own light. And for me, to kind of tie it back to one of the reasons why Jay brought me in the first place, I was someone who had been sexually abused as a child, and I hadn't told anyone until our podcast, surprise, last time. And we'll talk about kind of what made me open up about that. But when you look at me and you're like, wow, like, she has a
Yeah.
career, she has the husband, she has the kids, they have a beautiful home, like, she's got it all, she's so successful, when in reality, there's so much underneath an individual. And for the majority of my life, I masked this part of me that continually replayed, that I tried to suppress or run away from, this extreme shame and embarrassment and feeling of lack of self-worth and love. And I didn't know how to express that, whether it was with my family or my friends. And that's really where, when I get to the root of how I fell in love with exercise and how it made me feel, I felt like I was in control And from the mental release, if you've ever even just gone for a quick run and you get that endorphin rush, you feel good. And that's kind of where I was like, I am never going to feel like I am not in control anymore. And I'm never going to let someone take advantage of me again. And that's where it became a mission for me, kind of intrinsically, even though I didn't share it with other people, that I want to make sure no one ever feels the way that I do or that I did. So when I think about my conversation with Jay, it's interesting because had no idea that I was going to be sharing such traumatic experiences, but I felt, superficially, I'm like, well, I really don't know any of his listeners, so like, there's that. I will never see them in person, so maybe there's that barrier there,
Right.
but it was one of the most liberating experiences of my life, because
Oh,
if you think about childhood trauma,
wow.
you carry it around with you all the time, every day, and it's this invisible weight that just drains your mental clarity and your interactions with other people. Think about even relationships when you were as young as your late teenage years and 20s on beyond. There are people. I was looking at a study that says 1 in 6 males, 1 in every 4 females have experienced some sort of sexual abuse, and many people
Yeah.
don't talk about it. So that's where I feel I've been given this opportunity to step into my own light, to have the confidence, to have the conversations through you and through this amazing platform that you've created for your own community to feel safe to do something like that.
So, and let me ask you this, and I
Hey,
know,
can we pause for a minute?
yeah,
One, you are like adorable. I feel like I want to hug you. And Jay, she's one of us. I feel like she's one of us. Like,
absolutely, yes,
she's got the bug. She feels like she wants to serve others.
yeah.
You get it that we got to have movement and we've got to do things to help ourselves feel better. I love your story already. I'm sorry, I'm a fan already. Just saying. Go ahead, Jay.
Thanks.
So, it's funny, and before we came on, you had told me, and I didn't know this, that you hadn't even planned on telling your story that day. It just kind of happened, and it's so funny. And Kathy knows this. That's kind of how I told my story to someone for the very first time. I didn't. It wasn't planned. It wasn't. It just came. It literally just fell out of me. It just that moment felt right. So I want to ask you, um, because I feel like this, and I heard this on someone else's podcast, and they were just talking about telling, speaking your trauma out loud, whatever it is, and they said you begin to start healing from your trauma the day you say the word, you get your story out into the world, as scary and as hard as it is. That's the day you really truly begin to get better, or it's a huge step. So I'm curious, um, what was it that in that moment that kind of said, okay, this is the right time and place?
Can I rewatch the episode? I'm kidding. what, I, what I think it really came down to was, this isn't a conversation about me, even though it's my story. It's a greater purpose to being able to help someone else get out of their own darkness or their own feelings of unworthiness
Yeah,
and shame. And when you take that pressure off of yourself and you shift your mindset to, who can I help? What lessons can be learned, and how can I project that to help someone else? That's really in the moment where I was like, I feel safe. And typically when I do have conversations around this, because before I got married to my husband, and you're thinking about being intimate,
Mhm.
to have children, right? There's that
yeah,
now
oh yeah,
background,
yeah,
right? Of how that looks and feels, and one of the biggest recommendations that I can say to someone who is teetering with, I can't carry this weight around anymore, or I don't want to, is setting the context of that conversation with that individual. And for me, it was, hey, I really care about you. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I've come to the realization that I want to share something with you that's deeply personal. And after you frame the context, then you ask them this question, which is really getting them to feel primed for what you're about to say, but also for you to determine whether you feel comfortable based on what they say, if you're going to actually go through and say it. And for me, that question is like,
Yeah.
hey, like, is there anything I could say or do where you would not love me? And if they're like, well, it depends, and they're kind of poking, all right, maybe not. But if the person is genuine and you have a great relationship with them, as it was with my parents, and I was not as mature at 7 years old or however old I was, because
Right.
it was on for several years. But for Chris, when I talked to Chris, he was absolutely, what's on your mind? Like, why have you not told me already? And then once I've set the
Right.
context, then I've asked the question, that opens the door for there to be permission for me to now step up and have the courage to have that conversation and share. And that is going to be liberating for
Yeah.
you. But on the back end, that's heavy and obviously deeply personal. And
Yeah.
some people may not know how to respond to that. And you need to be okay with that too. Right. And so there's that other side of it of like sitting in that discomfort and working through that with them and coming out the other side significantly closer, having had that conversation. And I think it comes to
Yeah.
courage. I think it comes to authenticity and honesty. And I think for me, one of the main reasons why I waited so long was it was almost like this scarlet letter. Like people I thought were going to view me differently or see me as broken or, not love me anymore or, whatever the scenario that I made up in my head was that day. And so I just was like, keep suppressing it. You don't need to tell anyone. Like you don't want to lose everything. Like you're doing great in school. You're the lead in the school play. You're the captain of the field hockey team. Like don't say, like, you don't need to say any of that. And so I didn't. And then obviously it builds.
Right.
And then it becomes, again, this invisible weight that I was like, there's a better way for my quality of life. And the right people that are going to be in my life are going to be in my life. And those who aren't mature enough to be there to support me, they're not meant to be there. And that's okay too. And being able to walk away from
Yeah.
that is, it's hard, but it's also
You,
equally liberating.
I'll just add here. Gosh, I feel so grateful to be sitting here right now listening to you and obviously Jay. I have a special spot for Jay. And I just feel so grateful to be in both of your presence right now. And I'm in awe, and that's one of my favorite words, AWE. I'm in awe of both of you and your courage. But I'll just add this as a friend, right? As Jay's friend. Now, I guess I come in with an unfair advantage is that I'm a clinical social worker. But when I look at Jay, he's still that goofball kid in middle school where we'd make up these silly games and silly songs, right? To me, he's still kind of that. We've kind of grown up together, and that's special. So when he felt like, when he told me, I felt so proud that he trusted me to say that. And then I really thought hard about it, and I thought, how do I feel about it? And not Kathy as the clinical social worker, but Kathy as a friend. And I felt like, still Jay, they made up the silly song, still Jay that we giggled and, made up stupid little rhymes with. Like, it didn't change anything about how I felt about Jay. I didn't feel uncomfortable around him. I felt proud. I felt pride. Like, look at my friend all grown up and feeling healthier that he can move forward. But I also, part of me felt a little sad because I always saw Jay as a very happy presence. Somebody, if you were around, you laughed because he made you laugh. But what I didn't know is that he was hurting inside, and maybe some of that was covering up his hurt.
It was a
And then,
facade, totally.
and
Yeah.
and then what else I didn't know is, like life does. Sometimes, you see friends and then sometimes you don't see them for a few years or whatever, for whatever the reason is. So I didn't see Jay probably much for a while. But what I didn't know is, he was really struggling. He was in his adult part of that struggle. So I felt sad for that. But I never looked at him any different, and I was just proud of him. I'll just say that from the other perspective, not that somebody who's telling a story, but the somebody who's receiving a story about a friend. I
Yeah.
felt
Very
no
cool.
different. He's still the same.
I
There's
don't know if
no
that's
there's
good.
no
I don't know if
letter.
that's good or bad.
I
Yeah.
know, like nothing's changed.
But
Head's still bald.
well, I wasn't bald in middle school. It was actually the opposite.
I know, I know, I know.
Well, and I tell you what, it's funny. It's funny how, in a lot of ways, our how we came to telling our stories is parallel. Um, the first time I told the story, I hadn't planned it. It was to someone who had expressed their very similar story to me. So it was you and I had that same similarity that her and I did when I told my story for the first time. There's another layer of comfortability when you're because you and I had spoke privately prior and had told each other at that time. Um, and I just neither one of us were aware that you were going to tell the podcast world at that time. But there's just that extra layer of comfort when you're talking with or to someone who knows how you feel. Like you were saying that someone might say, "Oh, I understand." They don't. It's not their fault that they don't. It's just that they don't. Um, but it's there's it, it's hard. I took 45 years to say the words out loud for the first time. So for anyone, whether they're a teenager or whether they're 60 or whatever, to say the words out loud for the first time, it's I get emotional for those people because although we're all our journeys are different, I know how difficult it is to come to the realization that the words have to be said. It doesn't make it easy. Luckily, I didn't have the anxiety of anticipating saying the words. I just literally this person I said was having an everyday conversation with, and her story. She told her story to me, and within that context, in that moment, I said, "Me too." And I didn't wake up that day thinking I was going to tell my story. 5 minutes prior to that, telling my story would have never been on my mind. It just so for me, it was probably the best scenario because I didn't have the fear of the anticipation of saying the
Yeah.
words. Um, but that it meant a lot that day when you said the words. When you and I spoke privately, it meant a lot when you came on the podcast and said the words, and it means a lot to know that you didn't even know you were going to do it until that very second. Um, there was just something in you that
Safe.
felt
Something
felt
safe,
safe.
right?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
part of what Kathy and I try to do is make our space, make Eastern Shore Talk a safe, comfortable.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so that means an awful lot to me. Because for you to say, "Here's my broken part," I'm giving that to you to hopefully hold dear. And that means a lot to me, an awful lot. And I got to tell you, like when I got done that podcast that day, like my heart was both full and aching for the 6 year old Ann, like I
Yeah.
do for my 6 year old Jay. Um, but I was also I was proud to kind of like cement you as a friend who gave me that. So that's big, and it not just to me, but for you to be able to use that to as part of your story and probably a motivator, maybe not as much as you may even realize, to why you do what you do now. Um, so that's kind of what I want to talk about next, is kind of connect the dots from the idea of your story, and some things that you have done throughout your life as self-care to kind of work through that, and B, how that helps you now with what you're doing serving others.
Yeah, I mean, those are two great questions. And I think when you're looking at the journey of how you heal from traumatic abuse, it looks different for everyone. And I think, yeah, as you and I were talking
Yeah,
before the show started, what works for one person may not for another as well. So there's different timelines and there's different modalities along that line. But for me, I feel like, and even within this last year particularly, it's reconnecting with my faith, reconnecting with myself, and allowing myself to get uncomfortable with what it is that's causing pain, like legit pain and anxiety within me, and
yeah,
realizing that I'm not showing up as my best self to my kids, to my husband, to my family, to
Mm-hmm.
my clients if I can't show up for myself. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. And that's where the work comes in on self-care, which no one likes to talk about. And it's really a shame. I think mental health in general has gotten more publicity over the last year or so, but still not nearly enough. It is so significantly behind in my mind where it should be when we think about even just coming out of COVID and not having to worry about traumatic experiences that we've had prior to it, you know? So there's layers to this, but
yeah,
um,
Yeah.
when you think about self-care, it's truly like I spend time alone, whether that's meditation, visualization, doing my
Mm-hmm.
prayers with my holy water in the morning. You know, there are some non-negotiables for me: journaling, prioritizing daily gratitude, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the three things I've got in my life, instead of focusing on the negativity and what I don't have or what I want, focus on what I do have. Because I have a lot more than I think when I actually open my eyes to everything
yeah,
that's in front of me. And those are conversations I'm having with my
Right.
children too. Like Lila will make comments. My daughter
Mm-hmm.
is 9, so again, perspective here. But like Lila will make comments like, "I have nothing to wear in this closet today for dress down day," and I'm like, "Lila, you wear a Catholic school uniform every other day of the week. I think you can find some regular clothes and you're going to be fine." But instead of focusing on the clothes that don't fit you, focus
yeah,
on the ones that you do have. Perspective, darling. Perspective. You have clothes in your closet. They're clean.
yeah,
You know, like that's where it's
yeah,
all about. I think now showing up not only for myself, but for my children, and the conversations that we're having with ourselves, whether they're in here or they're in here, our children pick up on. And I even catch Lila sometimes saying something
yeah,
like, "Ugh, I don't like the way I look in this outfit." I'm like, "Girl, you're 9. I never had thoughts like that when I was your age." You know, so I think it's modeling as well as truly becoming, stepping into the person that you know you should be, that you've kind of held within this mask to protect yourself and everyone around you from feeling broken. So I mean, for me and for anyone else who's out there who is on this journey, realize it takes time, and in the beginning it's hard because it's not easy to confront, you know, demons that you've had within you for a long time, but that's where the real self growth happens, and that's where you're finally going to start dig your way out of those dark places, and you're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, yes, like I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I see this weight being literally lifted off me, catapulted off of me." And now you're able to enjoy simple things that before would have been numbing, I guess you could probably say.
the world opens up to you. Yep.
And what would you say? I love all of that. I love everything you just said. What would you say to somebody? I always try to think about what are people thinking that are listening. You know, what about somebody who's not there yet? And maybe it's a different type of traumatic event that happened to them or situation. But what if they're sitting there in it within themselves and they're like, thinking it's easier to suppress it and just not talk about it, rather it's grief and loss or of anything really, right? Or whatever their issue is they're dealing with. What if they're like, it's just easier to brush it under the rug and not deal with it? I hear what you're saying. Maybe I would feel better, but I'm just going to be distracted by work and kids and whatever, and I'm just not ready to take that lunch. Like, what could we tell people to help them to get to that, because I've heard people say, I'm not going to sit there and meditate and hum and cross my legs and whatever. People have different opinions about what meditation really is, and I know that because I probably thought that at one time, and I've had to really change my mindset on that. But either of you really, what would you say to somebody on how to break out of that habit of pushing that stuff down? I'm
Well,
not even talking about telling the world about it. I'm talking about getting to that place with self and really feeling better.
I think
Go ahead,
you,
Ann.
you have to be sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. You have to have come to a point where you're no
That's a
longer,
good thing to say.
like you're no longer accepting mediocrity in your life and reacting to it or going through the motions when we know and literature supports 90% of our day is on autopilot. We have to
Mm-hmm.
consciously make a decision with intention to create the life that we want. And if you're unhappy with it, choose to do nothing and then fulfill your own prophecy, or choose to take action. And that action doesn't have to be to announce it on a podcast. That action could genuinely be you're going to sit and take 3 deep
Right.
breaths with your eyes closed, and you're going to say something you're grateful for. Or maybe you're going to journal for 5 minutes, and just, it doesn't even have to be to a prompt. It could be with whatever's on your mind, just to get it out. Because I can tell you from the other
Yeah.
side, as I'm sure you're well aware, internalizing it means it's never going to go away. It is always going to be there. It is always going to be chasing you down. You're always going to be on the other side running after some sort of
It's heavier.
validation that you need, rather than being satisfied with who you are and what you have. And that to me is where I think just start small with yourself. And the journaling is a great practice that doesn't require anyone else. And you're still telling yourself through that practice what it is that you're doing. So that would be what I would recommend. And then to experiment. You don't know what you don't know. And I always say, don't knock it till you've tried it, right? So, like, yes, we've heard meditation and manifestation and all these like mystical things, right? Until you've tried it, how do you know? You have to be willing to surrender, you know? And people aren't
Yeah.
willing to be brave enough, courageous enough to surrender, to confront. And instead, it's easier to retreat. But that's not going to change the quality of your life. And if
Yeah.
you are actively choosing to not participate in social events or do things that you enjoy, you have your answer right there. You cannot go through life like that. You'll literally make yourself sick. The anxiety will internalize. It'll go right down to your gut, and then you're going to get a stomach ache. You're going to get sick, right? So like you can either take action or have to react to it. And I would say stop playing the victim. Your past does not define you. Take control. Take the first step,
Mm-hmm.
and then you work from there.
That's a beautiful answer. I
I,
love that answer.
I do too. I love that. It's funny, and Kathy, you're gonna hear this for the millionth time. I say this all the time when people ask me about my self care journey. It all started really when I was 40 years old, and just one day I was like, man, my life is just not what I wanted or hoped for it to be.
Yep.
And in that moment, I just started looking back at Jay, and I'm like, okay. And what it was a long line of failed relationships. That was kind of the instigator for me. And I'm like, okay, even if all these people were not the right fit for me, what was my part in that? Why was I choosing? Was I making all these unhealthy choices? And I had to really reflect and say, okay, how can I have control over how I move forward? And my life is not what I want it to be. Like you were saying, you got to hit rock bottom. You got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you, for me, it was, um, I really, when you start, you have to sit in it. And you kind of alluded to this a minute ago. You really, and this is where it gets scary for people. You have to sit in the pain. You have to get very familiar with it in order to figure out why and how it's affecting you. If you're not connected to it very personally, you don't know how to move in a better way with it. You just don't. Um, and that's a hard thing to say. Okay, you really got to get familiar with the stuff, the junk. You have to. Um, and it's a long, hard. It's not a linear path. It exits at ups and downs, but you just, and it's funny. Next week we're going to do. Kathy and I are doing one on self reflection. So it's
Mm-hmm.
funny. It's funny that um, you just have to take stock, even if you feel like your life is generally pretty good. I think it's important for all of us to take stock. Okay, you just take time to think. Okay, where am I in my journey? Is it where I want it to be? Even if we're generally pretty healthy, I think we should all take stock from time to time, just because. Um, but yeah, and it's interesting, and you said something that's very similar to what Linda said last night, Kathy. And these people have preconceived notions about these self care activities, and they think they're hokey, and they think And Linda was talking about that last night. She tried them all, and some of the things she
Yeah.
would have never imagined would have done her any good ended up being
Mm-hmm.
the things that helped her the
Yeah.
most. Um, so yeah, you've got to really. It's hard. It's kind of contradictory to say you've got to love yourself enough to realize that your life's not where you want it to be in order to start on the path. And the path's hard, and the path's long, and it's harder at the beginning. Not to say that it ever gets easy, but you get more familiar with it. So you grow accustomed to the work. If
Yep.
that's, I guess, is the best way to put it. So yeah,
What I like what Anne said too is she gives some simple instructions. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I think we all can say, we like today. I was pretty sick and tired of being sick and tired of today. Sometimes you're sick and tired of the hour, whatever you're sick and tired of. What can you change, right? And I think it's also good reminder that we're on autopilot. What did you say? Like 90% of the time during the day that we're on autopilot. That's a good thing to remember. And that you can start small, rather it's like breathing or journaling or whatever. And I think people think sometimes it's got to be like this whole, like, I think sometimes when people think about journaling, they're like, oh my God, like you're writing a novel. It doesn't have to be like that. You can just write, you know, what worked and what didn't today, and I always like, what's your daily win? That's my favorite. What's the daily win of the day? And sometimes I have to push myself, like nothing, no, there was no wins today. And I'm like, that's so childish. There's something, I have to challenge myself, but
Did you make
you
your bed?
know,
That's
what
one
worked
of
and what didn't. And then,
Yep. They actually talk about the science behind the benefit of doing something simple when you first wake up, whether it's drinking a glass of water, making your bed, something routinely that you can do that's chaos proof. No matter how crazy your day is, you can still do that. And once you've done that, right, you've
hot
put a
TJ.
little you can put a little coin in your confidence bank, and then from there, you're building momentum throughout the day because you've proven to yourself that you can do what you said you were going to do. So, as silly as it sounds to make your bed,
yeah,
it's a huge win. They had a naval officer at a graduation years ago
Yeah.
talk about that. And it is so true. It's so simple to do, but it's also so simple not to do. So that's where your disciplined habits come into play. That's where we stop relying on
Mhm.
emotion to get things done, because motivation's great when we have it, but it's never there when we need it. So we need to be able to show up for ourselves. I think that's the lesson at the end of the day. You need to care about yourself enough that you're not going to let emotions get in the way of what you need to do and how you need to take care of yourself. And whether it's something as simple as going for a 10-minute walk and getting some sunlight on your body, whether that's journaling, which probably people are deferring back to school, and so they don't want to be in school and they don't want to write because they don't like to write. But this isn't like you're getting a grade. This is for you. This is a reflection on your inner thoughts, and like to be alone with them is extremely powerful. So to deprive yourself of that, I would say shame on you, because you're missing this huge part of who you are. But that's where, when I look at my own clients,
Well, there's science behind writing it down, right?
yes, yep, there is.
Sorry.
And when I look at my own clients, that's where I say, okay, where are you coming to me from? What is your past history like? And a lot of times when it's nutrition and exercise, I need to know their diet history. You would never recommend starting them in any sort of calorie deficit if they've been diet hopping for the last 30 to 40 years. Oh, I did keto, but then I realized I actually like carbs. So I hopped over to intermittent fasting because my
Yeah.
coworker lost 20 pounds with intermittent fasting. Oh, but then I realized I like actually like to eat after 5 o'clock. So that didn't work for me. And so they literally just skip around 365 days, and they're wrecking havoc on their metabolism and their hormones and their gut health. So a lot of times with me, very much like the self-care practices that you talk about, it's getting to the self-care of the foundational habits that make you feel safe, where your body feels safe enough to lose weight if that's your goal, but also you get to the root cause of why you feel the way you do. Oh, you have bloating? Okay, let's take a look at your gut health. Oh, you have horrible mood swings? Oh, and I'm not talking menopause or perimenopause. Okay, you probably don't have enough fats in your diet. We need those to regulate your hormones. Oh, like you're noticing that you have a food sensitivity to blank. Okay, cool. Let's look at some anti-inflammatory. Like there's a cause, a root cause that's contributed to where you are. And once we can identify that, we start slow and simple with protocols that fit their lifestyle so that they can start feeling better. They can have a better quality of life, that it's no longer impacting what they want to do and who they want to be with. And everyone talks about generational wealth. I talk about generational health. You want to live long into
Oh,
your life,
nice.
and you want to be there for your kids and for your grandkids. That's what it's about. It's about those experiences. And so
Well, and eat Jay, we need her back on food. We need to bring her back talking more about what you're talking about with this food piece.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. We need you back
Well,
for that.
what's
And but and it you we're role models too. Like I have 4 sons that live in my house still, and it's like, I watch their habits, and my kids are 17 to 26 at this point, and they are still in my house. But I watch their eating habits, and they have some pretty darn good eating habits. But we've made we've made that a practice in this house, and it was probably because my youngest son became a type 1 diabetic when he was 5, so that really changed a lot of eating habits. And we did the I went crazy for like 6 months and did everything sugar free and whatever, and then I realized, what am I doing? This isn't even healthy. So now I've got all the artificial stuff in here jacking us up. So we just went back to really good practices and really good stuff in your body. I'm not saying we do that all the time, because goodness knows we like our junk too. But, to try to not push the ultra processed food all the time. And, guys, what you put in your body, proteins, but speaking of generational health, we affect those below us too, you
Yeah.
know?
And we have control over what they eat and what
what's
they
cool, Kathy, about what Ann does is,
Yeah.
yeah, Ann doesn't say, here's my program, do my program. She meets with each and every individual client and says, tell me about you. And she creates a customized program for each person. No two people probably do the same thing in her program, which
No.
is, that's
Yeah.
perfect. That's coming from a prior personal training background. That's perfect. Yes, there are some general things that most everybody can do from an exercise standpoint,
Mhm.
of course. But especially nutritionally, especially sleep wise and hydrating. That we all, even I, am not, do as well hydrating as I should have. But Ann's really good about being very comprehensive. She kind of covers the whole gamut of fitness and wellness, but she also, from a successful program standpoint, she customizes each client, and that probably, and if I had to guess, kind of kind of helps the connection between you and each individual client, because it's
Yeah.
not only is each um, each client, your relationship with each one just different because there's people, but like how you go about things with them. So it's very personalized and probably it probably helps connect you a little bit more with each one, if I had to guess.
Definitely based on personality, diet history, physical limitations, goals, obviously. But believe it or not, and it links back to this conversation, I start with mindset, because if I can't get you into the proper headspace, no matter what I teach you, even if it was the perfect plan, is going to work and is going to be sustainable. So we do this, and then we focus on everything else. And it's just like this call right
Yeah.
now. It's one-on-one with the data, us troubleshooting, going through lifestyle habits, understanding. One of the biggest things we work on is food cravings. And there's a multitude of reasons why an individual could have a food craving, which I won't get into because I don't want to be a huge dork. But we'll go through and identify triggers. We'll go
Because you're
through
going to come back and be the dork.
yeah. I'll come back and be the dork. I'll come back and be the dork for sure. And we'll go through case studies. We could even use you guys if you want. Because I feel like that's where it gets real, right? Because anyone can follow a plan because they're motivated in the beginning and they want to start and they're all excited. And then, even when with my 28-day challengers, I'm like, the challenge doesn't start. Day one doesn't start until you've been challenged out of your routine. It's easy to show up when you have time and your meals are prepped the first 3 days. What happens when your meeting runs late, or you had a meeting for an hour and a half that should have ended in 45 minutes, and your kids have homework, and then you have open house, and then you have you have to be able to manage your time effectively. You also have to see the value in managing that time so you can show up the way you want to. And then all of these other pieces, your stress, your sleep, your hormones, your gut health, your nutrition, your exercise, they all fall under that umbrella. So self-care is the pillar that we build from, goes along with mindset, and then we really start to hone in on those individual categories. It's pretty cool stuff.
I've always said, Ann, that as a personal trainer, you are training as much or more that person's mind as you are their body. Because
Yeah.
how we, and Kathy and I've talked about it so many times, but we talk about how we feel about ourselves affects everything in our life. And we'll break it down into the fitness and wellness specifically for your program of yours. Like what they're doing, how they feel about themselves is dictating those bad habits that have gotten them to a place they don't want to be anymore. And you have to we as trainers have to kind of familiarize ourselves with each client and I hate to say it like this, but know how to push each individual person's buttons by knowing their specific whys of how they got to a place they don't want to be anymore. And that's kind of how I exercise in a general sense is way more about improving our mental health than people know. And as I got older, I started to realize I was getting more mental health benefits out of exercise than I was physical benefits by far. And part of that was just I was not fully educated. I didn't know me enough. I had not realized all the junk in my own head that was in my own way until when all that cloud started to go away, I was able to kind of say, wait a minute, these things that I'm doing that Kathy and I now call self-care are helping me feel a certain way about myself. So now all these other things in my life, my career, my family, whatever. Like you said, Ann, bringing a better version of us to all those roles that we play in our lives, all the hats that Kathy and I talk about. The better we are, we always wear all these hats, and sometimes we're wearing multiple hats at the same time.
Yep.
The better we take care of ourselves, the better we are, the better version of all those hats that we have to present to all these people in our lives.
Absolutely.
So yeah, but I love Kathy's idea to have you back and
Yeah.
to start maybe getting more specific in the nutritional part, because um, I would say, at least in my own experience, even for me now, in Jay's fitness journey, nutrition is the hardest nut to be consistent with. It's just the hardest nut to crack for me, and I'm
Yep.
sure I'm not alone, because most people can be taught the exercises, and yes, some people, like my friend Kathy Castle, are allergic to going into a gym and doing the exercises. But it's the nutrition. It's when nobody's watching, when we feel like, well, it's not fitness time, so it's okay if I have this whatever, this piece of cake or these cookies or whatever. So I'm sure I'm not alone in that the nutritional part of it is the
Well,
is the stick is this
I would love
toughest.
to come back. I would love to. And I feel like, I mean,
Yes,
fundamentally,
please.
it's cultural to a large degree. Then once we dive into culture and the foods associated with it and the behaviors associated with it and the holidays associated with it, then we dive into like our behaviors on a regular basis, right? Even if you were to exercise for 30 minutes to an hour a day, there's still 23 hours in the day you can undo that through the food choices you're making. And overeating
Yep.
can be just as problematic as under consuming, because when we're under consuming and we're not getting the nutrients our body needs, metabolism slows and goes into like survival mode. So we're storing all the limited food that we're actually
Yep.
getting is counterproductive to what we really wanted to do anyway. People are like, well, if I just eat less, I'll weigh less. And I'm like, joke's on you. Not true. And now you're starving yourself. So like, can we
Yep.
please eat? So what we'll do is I can even put together like a list of like common myths. Like, do carbs really make you fat? The spoiler alert is no, they're the
Yep.
same amount of calories as protein, but the carbs that you're likely choosing
Right.
are a lot more delicious and aren't going to be metabolized like a donut in comparison to
Right.
some oatmeal or something else that maybe you should be having. So I can very easily put together some
Yeah.
of those conversations, because that's going to directly impact mental health and physical well-being in a way that's going to support the work that you're doing in your own community.
And I think you need to be a regular and you need to come back periodically. And I think you're such a good salesperson. I think you could sell me a country.
Okay, amazing. I would
Kathy
love
just wants Kathy just wants some nutritional advice.
I'll send
She's
you a
good.
survey.
She's outstanding.
You're going to
So
get all the love on Eastern Shore Talk.
yeah, absolutely. Now that they've actually can watch her for an entire episode, just imagine if 1 minute clips people were raving about her. Just imagine for a whole actual hour.
We're going to make your business boom.
I love it. You guys rock. I love it.
All right, before we get out of here, Ann, like we do on every episode, we're going to take just a few minutes and talk about some things we've been watching. So, is there anything, movies and or TV wise? I know you've been busy, especially with golf season and all. Is there anything that you
Oh,
guys have
yeah.
been watching or anything like that?
Well, I'll tell you, if it's not a sport in our house, we're probably not watching it. We always have Golf Channel on. Believe it or not, the Summer Olympics was the first time that Lila and John were able to sit down and watch it, and they were very into it. And prior to watching it,
Mm.
you're going to love this based on the topic of today's call. There was a documentary on Simone Biles, and the
Oh, we
Yeah,
documentary,
saw it. Yeah.
Kathy and I watched that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you know all about that. I knew she was a high performer. I knew that she had withdrawn because of some mental health issues. And superficially at the time,
Yeah.
because I hadn't done the work, I was like, what a cop out. She let her country down. Like, I can't believe she could do that. And then again, I'm admitting that was stupid. But anyway, I watched the
A lot
documentary.
of people thought that.
Yeah, I watched it and I'm like, holy cow. Number one, also sexually abused by her coach, right? By her
Yep. All those girls were. Yep.
So there was that connection that I'm like, oh my God, there's another example of someone who's able to use her platform for good. So I loved that. And then once you actually get to the psychology behind the mental health issues and how dangerous it was for her with, I think they called them spinnies or something, when she forgot her moves and how that could lead
Yep.
to her getting severely injured. And if not, she could have killed herself depending on what part of the bar she was
Twisties. It was
on.
twisties.
Yeah, there we go. Spinny, twisty, gymnast. I don't know. um,
Some gymnast term.
some term. But I was like, mad respect, because as an athlete who competed, I qualified for the Junior Olympics for field hockey. I represented New York in Empire State Games, and they had like the torches around the turf. So like that's what drew me in. Like, what is it really like? And then what I got was a lot more. What I got was a connection to an individual on a level I never thought I would. And then I got another perspective on the importance of mental health. So I thought it was an extremely powerful message, and it was obviously very timely with the Olympics. So
Yep.
I feel like that one is so boring to say is my choice, but I feel like it's relevant based on what we were
No, no,
talking
no. No, it's funny.
We
It's
love that
funny.
documentary.
We actually talked about this on a previous episode. That because I told Kathy, I'm like, Kathy, you got to watch Simone Biles episode, because I was familiar with the other documentary of when all those girls, all the female gymnasts were abused by the
Yes,
doctor in Michigan, and that
yes,
whole the Caroli camp and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting talking about athletes and mental health. Kathy and I also talked about
Mhm.
the male golfer who took his own life this
oh
summer,
my gosh,
and we
yes,
also talked about Lexi Thompson. Lexi Thompson retiring at 29 years old because of mental health issues.
yep,
Kathy and I talked about that because she was not aware of. She's not as
yep,
big as a golf fan as we are, and
yep,
I told Kathy, and I said, Lexi Thompson, you could not really pick a more um, appropriate role model for female golfers than Lexi Thompson.
I know.
Um,
She's like
it's
America's
just, and to
sweetheart.
have, and she said, yeah, she said it at the when she at the press conference when she announced that she was stepping away. She's like, look, you know, you guys don't understand like the backlash on social media that pro athletes get and X,
Yeah,
Y, and Z. And she's 29,
yeah,
and Naomi Osaka had to step away from tennis for a while. It's just,
yeah.
it's nice to see that a lot of these professional leagues and teams are starting to kind of catch up and have um, have resources for mental health for their athletes,
Yeah.
because it's it's and then
And believe it or
you add in
not,
the whole.
that's the number one thing. If you were to look at research of college athletes, right, and you're looking at like who are the athletes that are going to go from the collegiate level to the pros, it's not necessarily a differentiation of skill. It's this: what's up here,
Yeah,
what is their mental health, what is their
how can they handle it? Yeah,
like there
yep.
was I saw an Instagram reel the other day, and it was like Kobe, Michael Jordan, Steph Curry. They all have self-care mental health routines that they do religiously,
Mhm.
and no one
Wow, I
talks
didn't
about
know
it.
that.
Yes, I don't know if I can find it because I was just aimlessly
Mm.
scrolling, and I always try to find
Mhm.
something to send to my son, motivational, to get him fired up. And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, this is brilliant. And it's like, it makes sense. Tim Grover, right? One of the most famous, iconic
Mm.
coaches to ever work with athletes. He has amazing books that he actually goes through the process of. I think it's called Relentless is his book or something along those lines, and he writes like what's the mental psychology behind these athletes. And a lot of times it comes down to they recover and they have such extreme self-care routines that it matches the intensity that they're training, and it
Wow.
makes sense, right? Are you
Wow.
recovering as well as you are training? And if the answer is no, there's an imbalance. So clearly there's something that you could be doing. to better yourself. And that was like, oh my gosh. So it's amazing. The literature out there.
Well, that's a good theory in life, right?
Yep.
That's good for life, right? We work so hard, whether it's a sport or a job, whatever you're working hard at, but are being a parent, whatever, are you recovering from that? All those jobs we have. That's a good that's good for life, period. I like that.
Yeah.
So, Kathy, you were able to watch Child Star last night?
Okay, Jay, I fell asleep at some point.
It's funny. You texted me and said, I'm watching Child Star. And then I texted you back and didn't hear from you. I'm like, Kathy fell asleep watching it.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I fell asleep. Not because it was boring, but because I am like an old man and I conk out. Like when I start getting comfy, I conk out at night because I just run and then stop. But anyway, I am going to finish that. That was another one Jay put me on, um, with Demi Lovato and Drew Barrymore and that is a good show. That is just a good show talking about child stars and
Yep.
what they're put through,
Yep.
mentally. And it's a little bit mind blowing because you really don't think about it. I mean, we have child stars that entertain us all the time and we just expect it, right? And they're adorable. I mean, was Drew Barrymore not the cutest at playing Gertie in E.T.? I mean, she was adorable, but that poor girl went through it, and I don't know. I just thought it was a really good, what I did see of it. I need to finish it. It was a good show, showing the behind the scenes of those child stars.
Yeah. When she said, "Oh yeah, at 10 years old, I was having adults giving me drugs at 10 years old," I was
That's
like,
horrible.
and she's like, "Oh, that happens." I wasn't the only one. But yeah, it's speaking of mental health and
Yeah.
and then the parents are kind of lost in all this thing, and that's part of the reason why the child stars have such a difficult time. It's informative. It's eye opening. It's sad, but there's also some. Drew Barrymore's kind of come out the other side, and now she's such an
Mhm.
advocate for all these wonderful things. And if you've
Yeah.
ever watched her show, she takes time before the show, and she'll talk to the studio audience, and she'll ask questions, and she
Yeah.
connects, and she's figured it out, and she's come out the other side seemingly um, much better. So there's that redemptive quality. Um, I actually caught last night the end of Field of Dreams, and I had not seen that movie
Uh,
in the longest time.
Such a
That
good
is,
movie.
oh my gosh, it's
Mm.
Kathy, you and I are baseball fans to the core, but
Yeah.
it's not a baseball movie. It's a life movie.
Yeah.
It's baseball's just the background in it. Oh my gosh, if that like the last 30 minutes doesn't just grab your heart and make you feel, it gives you all the feels. That's a successful movie experience, Kathy, that I talk about. If it makes you feel, it makes you think, or it teaches you something, it's a success. It's self care with movies. Um, so yeah, it's
Yeah. And one of the greats were in there that we just lost, right?
yeah, James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's good in that movie. He's good in every movie, but that's such a good movie.
yeah. It's like it's a perfect movie. And a couple years ago when they rebuilt that stadium, and
Yeah.
Kevin Costner walked out of the corn, and even though it was the
Right?
Yankees, like I got goosebumps watching that,
Yeah.
and the Field of Dreams music was playing in the background. Like it doesn't. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's such a perfect movie because you think you're watching baseball, but it's not about like Ted
Yeah.
Lasso. It's not a sport. It's not a soccer movie. It's not a soccer show. It's a life
Yeah.
show.
Ted Lasso. Ted
Mhm.
Lasso's great.
Oh,
Then you definitely can come back.
oh yeah, we're a huge, and they're moving towards season 4. Kathy, they're talking about it.
I'm excited.
Kathy and I, Ann, have a friend, Dr. Marnie Stockman, who wrote a book called "Lead It Like Lasso," and her degree is in leadership. So she takes the Ted Lasso story and speaks all over the place about teaching leadership and using Ted Lasso's show as her kind of her backdrop to how she teaches people
That's really
leadership in our community. It's and
I love that.
we've talked to her on the podcast, and yeah, it's pretty cool. You can't go wrong with anything Ted Lasso.
No.
Well, Ann, thank you so much. We could not thank you more for being here.
Yes, this was incredible.
We're happy to have you, and we're definitely going to have you back.
Awesome. I'm excited.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us on Eastern Shore Talk, and we will check you out next time. Take care, guys.